We are happy to welcome everybody to another episode of Healing Healthcare. We have two incredible guests today. We're so excited to get the conversation started. We have Dr. Chase Anderson and Ellen LaPointe. Sheena will tell us more about them and we'll get into it.
Hi, everybody. We are so blessed to have both of you today. So today we have Dr. Chase T.M. Anderson, who is currently a child and adolescent psychiatrist at fellow at University of California, has numerous writings that have been in so many different journals. We so appreciate you. Come on, come on. And then we have Miss Ellen LaPointe, who's a chief executive officer of Fenway Health, an LGBTQIA healthcare research and advocate. And we also so many things that we want to talk about with you, all of your research, all of your advocacy, all of the numerous ways that you have provided for the LGBTQ community. So Dr. Chase, I'm going to start with you. I just want to know the big question that I feel like we all kind of want to talk about is, what are we not talking about as far as like LGBTQ that you feel we should be talking about?
Yeah, I think the thing we're not talking about right now, first of all, is what is happening with our transgender brothers and sisters and family. I am very active on Twitter, and one of the things I haven't seen so far is really senators as well as companies calling into notice the fact that our transgender brothers and sisters and family are really struggling right now. There are bills in different states that are against like healthcare providers providing healthcare for these individuals. It's also about sports teams. It's also just what we're seeing is a lot of things that we've seen before in the past of trying to restrict people's rights and not let people live as they are. So I think we all really need to call attention to that. And feel free to call me Chase. I'm trying to flatten the hierarchy by like not
Okay,
being called doctor and stuff. So Chase is totally fine.
got it. And Miss Ellen LaPointe, what do you feel you want to talk about that you feel as though maybe we're not representing in the media as far as healthcare? What do you feel like we need to talk about more?
Sure. Well, I certainly agree with Chase that this is the situation for transgender people in this country right now is really critical. So I just would double down on that and hope we can talk about that today. I also would also lift up the importance of what sometimes you hear referred to as intersectionality in our work. Spoken more plainly, the importance to center the BIPOC community in LGBTQIA conversations and otherwise. I think that is leading edge work in our communities. Our organization, Fenway Health, was founded 50 years ago. It was created as a free clinic, basically, to provide care to people without health insurance for LGBTQ community people. And in order for our work to remain as relevant now as it was then, we really need to be centering the people who need us most today, and they are transgender people and people in the BIPOC community.
Just so everybody is aware, Fentway started off with one doctor, one nurse, a very small clinic where people could come and get care. And now that clinic has over 600 on the staff with 33,000 patients and a budget. Okay. So we are, it's amazing that you were able to do this for this community. Would you say that the community helped? Was it the government? Like, how did you
Sure.
get where you are now?
Well, as I said, we were founded as a volunteer-free clinic in 1971. We're actually 50 years old this year, so that's a really exciting milestone for us. We actually made the first diagnosis of AIDS in New England in the early 1980s, and that was a major turning point for this organization and for our community. So at that point, we moved really into the forefront of making sense of how to provide compassionate, competent care to people with HIV and AIDS, how to conduct the research that needed to happen to develop safe and effective treatments. And as you said, over time, we've really become quite a large federally qualified health center and research institute. That process has been supported, I think, organically over the years. First and foremost, always by the community, people who really are showing up for each other to provide the kind of financial and other supports that we all need in this space. We are funded by insurance companies and grants that we receive to do the research that we conduct. We provide care to everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Our motto is that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. So we have become quite large over time, and extended to provide now services throughout Boston and Cambridge and Lynn to LGBTQIA older people, to young people, people living with HIV, drug users, survivors of domestic violence and sexual assaults and hate crimes and misconduct in the police force. And then we do a lot of advocacy work as well, because that's actually where, you know, the rubber hits the road in terms of changing the systems that have been built to actually deprive people of the opportunity to thrive. So the policy work is key to making the world better.
So, Ellen, I want to thank you so much for your work, because I grew up in that area in the 70s, and in the gay community. Although I'm not gay myself, I was fully immersed in the gay community, all of my friends when I was young. And so I can't imagine being from Boston, knowing the culture there. I can't imagine the hurdles that you were up against. And I think my question really is for both of you is, how do you keep your wits about you in the struggle for equity, in the struggle for, you know, continuing your activism and doing your day jobs? You know, how do you take care of yourselves?
Chase, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I think that's an excellent question, because what we've seen a lot of is caregiver burnout, and also psychiatry burnout, especially during coronavirus. For me, it's been a lifetime of figuring out how do I set limits in a lot of ways. I can't take on every issue. I wish I could. I think all of you know I wish I could heal the world and we could all be friends and like go to Disneyland all the time, but we're not there yet. I think I make sure to take time for myself every day. One of the things I do is I put in my headphones and I go for 4-hour walks and like listen to K-pop music and things like that, and like Wicked and all those things. And it gives me time to decompress. And a lot of the times during the day, I'm taking on the emotions of others and I have to transmute them, give them back to those people in a way that helps them and repackages what they were saying to me. So I need to sometimes purge that a little bit on my own and process that and think about how do I help. One of the other ways that I do that and keep myself afloat and grounded is actually writing. That's why I write so much. It's not only cathartic for me, but it helps me repackage what my own thoughts are in a way that hopefully will reach others so they don't feel alone. That's why I write, is to help other people feel seen finally and not feel like I'm doing this by myself. It's also to help people learn the verbiage around things. Like one of my recent articles was around minority stress. And that's something that I understand because I've lived that experience and I've researched it. But a lot of people who reached out were like, I've never heard this before, but it describes exactly what I'm going through. So that helps ground me by like reaching other people. I think it's a positive symbiotic loop in a lot of ways.
I don't know about you, Sheena and Ellen, but I want to be Chase's friend. So I'm going to be, that is going to be one form of my self-care going forward. I started at Fenway Health on March 9th, 2020. It was the first day really here in the state of Massachusetts when the governor really accelerated everything around our need to respond to COVID-19 as a severe public health emergency. So instantaneously here at Fenway Health was sort of thrust into an organization that had to completely transform itself in order to continue to maintain the care and services that people who count on us need, but also to keep ourselves safe, right? So to actually figure out how to provide this care and these services safely. It was astonishing, and as an opportunity, as a witness, I was a witness to this, really, truly. I take no credit in leading this, only because I was brand new and just myself making sense of this place. But I will tell you, this is an organization that really was built around how to respond effectively to a public health crisis. In some ways kind of helped write the book, you know, in the HIV and AIDS era. And so we were able to apply a lot of what we learned then to how we responded now. What I will say about your very excellent question is that need for self-care and sort of really paying attention to what it means to kind of be in it for the long haul is essential. And this particular situation we all find ourselves in is literally like no other that we've ever experienced, because it is a 24/7 experience for every human being on the planet. That has not been true of other pandemics and epidemics in the world, or other than, you know, the Spanish flu 100 years ago and so forth. So people get tired. They here at work, there a lot is asked of us, and especially for the frontline folks on my team who work with the patients and the clients every day. And then they go home, or as such as it is, maybe that means they go into the other room of their home. And they have a family, they have kids who can't go to school, who are there, who need their attention. They have partners, they may have economic challenges. We've had many staff who've lost family members to COVID. You know, it's been extremely challenging. And I and we have been really trying to make sure that we encourage people to take time for self-care, whether that is taking time away to be, you know, kind of away from the job, but or if you only have a moment for 3 deep breaths in a given day, or just a chance to step outside and look up into the sun and feel that on your face. I kid you not, that just those very small things. One of the things I started doing early on was just doing these weekly videos for staff, just kind of inviting them to presence and pause. And there's a place for gratitude practice in these challenging times. That's something that I work on at home myself. Um, I am a writer as well, Chase. That has been a respite for me, and something that I find, you know, to just help rejuvenate. And then just, you know, eating well, moving, and trying to sleep. Just the attending to this physical body that we are in, because it's all we have.
So I have a question, because I feel like in the healthcare setting, we have now, our admission questions now say, like, how would you want to be referred to as far as he, him, his, or she, her, hers? And I'm not going to lie, a lot of us are somewhat, I'm not going to say uncomfortable, but sometimes the question is harder for older adults, because they're like, what do you mean he, him, her? You know, what do you think this is? You're calling me, you know? So they get like uptight about it. So sometimes it's an uncomfortable question to ask people, but then you miss the mark when it is someone who does want to be referred to a certain way. Then there's this other issue of, it's a little different when you're in a hospital setting. Everybody got on the gown. You don't have the clothes on that you had on before. Your hair is not how it used to be, or you don't have lashes on, or those things that sometimes point you in the direction of how someone wants to be referred to. I don't know a way that we can make it simpler, like maybe having it on the door or something a little bit more, I guess, indicative of how someone want to be referred to. But I feel like in healthcare, we completely miss the mark when it comes on how to treat people who want to be identified a certain way. And I can be honest in saying, I really don't know how to fix it. So if either one of you can enlighten the healthcare workers of how we can better serve this community and be more open-minded, because honestly, it's such our range of patients is so large that the same questions that we ask a 25-year-old that may want to be referred to that, we ask a 75-year-old and they are extremely offended. So it's an education piece that we don't necessarily know how to educate everyone to what, you know, how y'all know what do I do?
Maybe I could speak to this from a kind of institutional standpoint, and then Chase, if you would like to maybe take it on as a kind of at the individual level and how you work with your patients and clients. Would that
I
work?
love that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, you know, Fenway Health, just over 40% of our patients at Fenway Health identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer. And about 12% of our patients identify as transgender or gender diverse. So this is actually a leading edge space in our work. And you know, we hear stories every single day about how important it is for people who identify as transgender to have access to quality care that's administered by people who really understand and recognize their full humanity. Okay, so because when we fail to do that, what happens is those people who have come to us for care and support can't get what they need. They just literally cannot receive the care that they need. So our organization actually works very hard to ensure that all of the providers here who meet every patient know how to meet and understand and address the health needs of our transgender patients. We actually run an annual conference for clinicians that shares best practices in care for transgender patients. And what's interesting, I'll share this, is the telehealth program that we built in response to COVID-19 has turned out to be an extremely powerful tool to reach transgender people around the country who live in places where they cannot get quality health care for themselves. So it's turning out to be quite a thing to be able to work with it. I think it's something like 38 states now that we've been able to do that in a wonderful way. You really hit it on the head. It's a process that takes time. There's no one thing, right? It's a series of things. We have an education and training division that actually does this work with providers all over the country and actually globally to try to help healthcare folks in healthcare settings understand how to meet these people. And it's an ongoing process. So I'll just pause there, and Chase, maybe you could take over. Maybe there's a conversation after that.
Yeah, Ellen, I love those points. I think it really is a multi-pronged issue. I think sometimes in society we try to say like this will be the right answer, or that'll be the right answer, or this is one solution that will fix everything. As we see in society, that's not true. We need multiple, we need conversations, we need people writing, we need people speaking up. So coming at from the individual level, one thing I try to do on Twitter, and I also do this in writing, hopefully, and just in regular like day to day, I try to normalize these conversations for people. I think that's a big thing. We sometimes as a society get to a point where things have gotten so big and like so problematic that we're like, oh, how do we fix it now? Instead of having those day-to-day conversations like on one-on-one, like in the hospital with our family members, so then we don't have to get to those big moments. I think one way that I try to do this is when I meet like a new patient. So I work with kids and adolescents. And so I always say like, hi, my name's Dr. Anderson, but you can call me Chase. I'm the child and adolescent fellow. I'll be working with you and talking about your emotions. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So it sets that baseline of like, I am here and somebody who is safe. I'm going to like show to you that I'm opening that door. You don't have to tell me your pronouns, but I've shown you that I will share mine with you. So that gives them a gateway to be like, oh, this is a safe space. With adults, you are completely right. Some adults were like, what are you talking about? What are pronouns? And I think every time that has come up, it's fodder for conversation. I always view things as some people might not understand things. There are things I don't understand about race, about being gay, about being transgender, but I always want to come at it from this is a conversation where we can hopefully both grow. So when it happens with people who are older who don't understand it, I say, you know, sometimes people use different pronouns to describe themselves and it's part of their identity, and identity is important to a lot of people. So this is why I'm asking you this question. You don't have to answer right now, but I am here if you do want to tell me what your pronouns are. It alleviates somebody feeling pressure as well. I've also seen people who have badges that have their pronouns on them, and I think that also normalizes things for people. It's really cool. People on Zoom have started putting their pronouns, and it just is a lot of normalizing, and we're holding those conversations now, and we can do that with patients too. So.
If you imagine uh, being referred to as he and his, Sheena, having told us already that your pronouns are she and hers, how jarring that might be to you. This is what we're working to overcome, is that the trans and gender non-binary people experience that disruption inside themselves whenever they are misgendered. So by getting ourselves all comfortable identifying ourselves every time, first of all, we alleviate the burden on them to identify themselves as having a gender identity that you may or not notice or know about. We're just all doing it. And I think it actually makes us all sort of part of one community instead of even, by alleviating the burden on one group of people, you make us all sort of in a belonging space. So it has huge impacts, and it may raise questions. It does raise questions for folks who are new to this understanding of what it means to be transgender or non-binary. That's great. I say yes. I think grace and patience are our friends in this space, And just really, even when someone has what might feel like an angry reaction when you ask them their pronouns, to just recognize that that's just a space they're in, and to make room for that and meet them is a generosity.
I think it's amazing that you said, grace, patience, because that's really what it is. And Chase, I think it's a great idea to introduce yourself as whatever pronouns you want, because again, I think that that's a great way to open the door to someone who may not have told you, and then you're making it like, oh, you can tell me because I told you. I think that's a great way to do it. I also think that, and please, if anybody is watching this and you don't agree, I totally understand. But from my view, the people that I know that fit into this community, they are 100% open to questions. They a lot of times realize how it's something that's not talked about. And a lot of times they even feel more heard by people asking them questions rather than just assuming or judging them, or those type of thoughts. So for me, when I have a great coworker named Curtis who like schools me on everything, and I'm always asking him like, wait, what does that mean? Wait, so okay, so explain it again. And he's always like, Sheena, this is how you say it, this is what it means. And I'm like, but I don't understand. So I think that he respects that I have these questions. He respects that I'm asking him. He thinks it's cool that I care enough to want to know and want to understand. So I think it's important that we, like Chase said, normalize these conversations. But also, if you don't know, that's an open door to explain. So maybe when we're approached by patients who may be in the older dynamic that don't understand or whatever, like Miss LaPointe said, it's just asking those, like communicating with them, telling them why you're asking these questions, because that may be the first time that someone has explained it the way that you explained it. And maybe then it'll open the door for them to understand someone in that situation. So I think both of you made great points as far as like how healthcare workers can understand this better, but also how people can approach this situation. Because I can't tell you, when it comes to racism, I would rather someone communicate with me and talk to me about what my needs are and what's important to me than just assume. So I think it's the same thing, in the LGBTQ, is more so having an understanding that not all, I'm sure, but a lot of people are open to having these conversations and explaining it to you, as long as you're respectful and you come from a genuine place of curiosity.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think I give talks on minority stress, and one of the things I always say is like, we can ask, like, as long as you're coming from that place of respect, like you're talking about. I think that's so important, because sometimes people are coming from a space of, I want to prove myself right. And so if you're coming from a space of, I want to understand more about this person, that's a totally different conversation going in. I think I always try to also give that person an out. If I do have to like have them explain something, I will say, like, these are the pieces of information I'm coming in with, and this is what I know. I might not be completely right, and I'm open if there are other ways that you're thinking about this, because I see you as an individual. So I think that helps also like set this tone of like giving them an out, because some people don't want to talk about it, but it gives that open door of like, I am here to talk about it more if you want to, and shows my knowledge as well. So I'm not coming to the table with like nothing for them.
Right. Chase, you talked about this in something you wrote that I read, quoting someone who once said to you, I never want to burden you with speaking about these issues. And this was about racism in particular, right? But if you want to talk about the racism you've experienced, I'm here to listen. That opening, both to come in and also to decline, I think is again, it's a way to meet someone, uh, and really respectfully and openly. So I think that applies here as well in the conversation.
Absolutely. Because in times of like George Floyd, I can't tell you how many times coworkers were like, yes. And I'm like, sis, not today. I'm stressed. Like today is not the day that you want to come up to me and ask me questions about racism. So I totally agree. Like, I think that you have to give someone an in and out, because not all the time. Sometimes the world is traumatizing. It's a whole movie out here every day. So sometimes we don't necessarily have the capacity to explain something like that. I also think, I don't know, and I don't remember her name, but I also worked at a hospital where they did transgender surgeries, and the doctor was also transgender. And I thought that that was super cool because the patients were able to relate to her in a certain type of way, and they were able to communicate. And I'm sure that she was able to relate to them. So I'm sure it's the same as like when I go into my gynecologist and see a Black GYN or a Black midwife, I feel like, oh, I can explain myself different to her, and I can, communicate with her on a different level. So I feel like that also is something that can be raised as a way to communicate, in a way to make them feel more comfortable. Because let me tell you, it's not something that nurses somewhat understand. As soon as we see a penis, we say he. That's just how our brains work, because we were taught to work that way in school. So I think it's amazing to have that outlet. And the surgery was, just the whole thing was something that a lot of people didn't understand. So I feel like it was largely important that she was someone that could. So I think,
Sheena, was it Dr. Marcy Bowers?
I don't remember. It was like 10 years ago. I don't remember, but she was in Philly. So if that's one in Philly, it could have been.
I don't know if Dr. Bowers worked in Philly or not, but she's a really prominent transgender sexual reassignment surgeon, and she's done amazing things with genital mutilation and really interesting. Trying to do a show with her.
Amazing.
Well, it's definitely a both and, right? So representation matters. We want to see ourselves when we walk in the door of the place where we're going to be putting our well-being into the hands of another person. And we have a right to expect that everyone we encounter is going to have that same competency. So we need both things to be happening in all settings. And I think we have an obligation to educate ourselves and make sure that we are taking the steps we need to take so that we're not asking people in any given community, whether this is a BIPOC conversation or a conversation about transgender people or LGBTQ issues, to be doing all the lifting every time. So, and I know every one of us on this in this conversation knows that, but I think it's important to say.
I also think sorry, Sheena, sorry. I also think, setting an example, is, if I could take one thing away from Chase's advice on, how healthcare workers can approach a situation, or anybody can approach any situation, right? I know that when I'm dealing with my kids, if I'm up here and I'm stressed and I've had it, and I approach them with a certain type of energy, they're going to meet my energy and they're going to scream back at me. And if I take a moment and I take a breath and I pull it together and I try to find my calm and I approach it from that way, then I'm receiving that energy. So I think every interaction with every human being is an opportunity to sort of give them a chance to mirror what we're giving them. So it's a good point.
And I think it's about, just like you said, meeting energy. I think that also goes along with healthcare. There's so many times where you're a nurse and you're walking onto, let's say, a sickle cell floor. And a lot of those nurses are not educated on what sickle cell is, like, we know the basics, but do you really know? Do you really know? Do you really know what they're going through? Do you really know what it's like to be on narcotics since you're born? Do you really know the dynamics? And it helps, because then you're walking into the room with a better understanding of how that can affect someone's psyche. So it's the same thing if you're working on a floor where they may have more LGBTQ of a community because they're doing transgender surgeries. You don't need to just be educated on what the surgery is. You need to be educated on the psyche behind it, what comes with this, what comes emotionally with this, how they may have been treated before you, and how that may affect their care coming in. So I think it's also about education, because in healthcare, sometimes we're just a body and we're placed on random floors and we don't necessarily have an insight as to the mental psyche. We just have orders, and we're machines sometimes, rightfully so. Sometimes we have to be, but nonetheless, we kind of need to put the heart back into it. And this is just for everyone. Like I said, sickle cell, CF, there's so many different diseases that affect certain populations, and those populations can be misunderstood because people don't understand the psyche behind it. We have CF patients all the time who sometimes present differently than a typical patient, but I'm sorry, cystic fibrosis for anyone that doesn't know it. And you have to really think of the psyche of being sick since you're a newborn, you know, and how that may affect the emotional state of someone as an adult. You know what I'm saying? So I think that certain people get it because you just have that certain kind of empathy and compassion in you, and it shows. But then other people are just like, whatever, she's in there crying, I don't know what to do, just give her some pain meds, I guess. And I'm dead serious. This is how we really move. So I think that it's just about also having education, because the more that we're educated, the more that we can educate others. And for our patients that don't have this type of conversation around their care, we can still educate them so they know for the future.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because it brings into play like how is our education system built where LGBTQ plus people are not even seen as they're growing up. How do you know about yourself? How do you know about other people? How do people who are not LGBTQ know your stories? And that's why I love psychiatry in a lot of ways, is it's bringing it back to what is a person's story, because somebody could show up and they have cystic fibrosis. That doesn't mean I know anything about their life. I know the mechanisms of disease, but I do not know, like, how did that play out in their life? How did that lead to them being here? What struggles have they gone through? What are their hopes and dreams for the future? So I think that applies to LGBTQ plus populations too. I think when we go through med school, one of the things that happens is we get a lot of, like, they're called STEM questions, but it says like 48-year-old man, like gay male, and you're like, oh, they're gonna have HIV. Like, that's how the questions are built sometimes. So how are we building our medical education to actually teach people that everybody is different, even if we do have things that, like, sometimes with certain populations because of societal structures occurred more to those populations. So taking a step back to think, how do we bring that heart back into it in the real stories?
More broadly, I was going to actually, even in addition to the health setting, there's a wonderful organization called Lambda Literary, which is a small but mighty national nonprofit that brings the stories of LGBTQ people into the world. So fiction and nonfiction, poetry, you name it. And I served on the board of that organization for a period of time, and it was an absolute pleasure. And they have a program called Writers in Schools, which right now isn't happening, unfortunately, because of COVID, but they bring LGBTQ authors to classrooms in elementary schools around the country. And actually, it's mostly in New York and LA at this moment, but to bring and read to them, you know, stories and really bring themselves and these stories into the lives of these young people. As young readers, and again in the spirit of kind of normalizing and also just exposing folks to three-dimensional human beings who are LGBTQ, you know. Programs like that I think can go a really long way.
Ellen, can you speak a little bit about policy and how, you know, Sheena has, you know, so much experience as a nurse, and nurses have so much experience with things that doctors just don't have the same experience, because doctors come in and out quickly and nurses have to stay there all night long and visit the rooms multiple times. And so there are so many small things that are huge things that require policy change. I mean, why can't we educate? And that just sounds like such a fantastic, simple idea, to educate the nurses on a sickle cell floor about sickle cell. And I don't know the way you get your assignments, Sheena, or how they assign you floors or whatever, but can you talk a little bit about policy and why these things are so hard to implement? And how can people be activists and try to help push it along if possible?
Great. So you're speaking of public policy, you mean? Okay.
Administrative policy, hospital policy.
Okay. So the whole range of things. I think the internal policy work is, you know, institution by institution. And I think, you know, here actually, what I would call out in particular for our organization at this moment that we're in is, as I mentioned earlier, we're a 50-year-old organization, and we are really right now working to take that legacy that we have, that community-centered approach to things, and our ability to respond in ways that are both urgent but also adaptive and thoughtful, to look at how we can better center race equity in everything that we do. So our identity here has been LGBTQIA+. And as of course you know, many people are of color, are BIPOC and LGBTQ, and immigrant, and confronting challenges, physical and mental health challenges and so forth. So thinking about these things in an intersectional way requires, and doing it in a way that's really systematic and systemic in our organization is critical for us to continue to be effective and relevant in meeting the needs of the people who need us right now in this time that we are in. So our organization actually is taking a whole host of steps that are going to be long. This is going to be our ongoing work. We will never be done. To think about how to ensure that we are engaged in sort of are integrating racial equity into our policies and practices. It's exactly what you said, Ellen. How we approach our service delivery and our practice, how we create a culture of belonging in this organization so that our staff can show up with their whole selves and feel seen, heard, respected. It involves the board, it involves the staff, it involves communication and work with our patients and partners. We have to learn how to have difficult conversations together. We have to learn how to recognize bias and address it. Learn how to really support people in understanding the impact of microaggressions in the workplace, for example, things that happen between staff, things that happen from provider to patient, and giving people tools to address those things, not just how to recognize it, but what to do when we see it and how to respond together and constructively. How do we design our programs to consider the equity implications of everything that we do? Just that discipline and habit of mind is new and critical work, I think, that is going to be ultimately quite transformative. It translates to things like, how do we compensate our staff? Do we have clear pathways for professional development and advancement that people can achieve regardless of race or ethnicity or gender identity? Do we have models of leadership in the organization of folks? Again, it's that ability to see yourself anywhere in the organization. This is true for staff too. How diverse are we? It's diverse, by the way. Diversity, in my view, is not the goal. It's the outcome. It's the thing that happens when you actually create a place to work that is welcoming and creates a culture of belonging and opportunities for advancement. That's what happens when you do this well. It's not your goal. It's not a numbers game, right? So that's the institutional response I would offer. From a sort of a public policy standpoint, the first thing I would say is that, you know, we are very much in a better place now than we were 6 months ago with the new administration. There is a lot to undo that has been done, and you know, that have been very intentional decisions on the part of the prior administration to roll back hard-won gains in the LGBT community, LGBTQIA community. One of those things had to do with protections against discrimination that were built into the Affordable Care Act that were removed in June of last year. Our organization joined several others, and there were several lawsuits filed around the country to fight that, to say, no way you can take those away. We still need them. We know every day people walk in our doors every day and they tell us that they are here with us because they got hurt somewhere else or they couldn't find what they needed. So these protections are as necessary now as they ever were. So we have to be willing to go as far as to file a lawsuit if we have to. We have to stand up whenever there are some, I don't have the actual number in my brain at the moment, but there's over 100 anti-trans bills in the country right now, in state and federal legislation that is under consideration. We have to stand up with one voice and speak out and make sure those things don't become law. And if they do, we have to push further to make sure that they are not upheld in court. I mean, this is the essential work. On the proactive side, I think there are lots of opportunities within an administration now that is, I think, going to be a lot more open to working with us around achieving equality, true, real equality, including this thing called the Equality Act, which just passed the House. So, you know, there's always room for hope. And we must always be working hard and never despair or give up.
It's so funny. Me and Ellen, we need a class on how to control our facial expressions. As soon as you said previous administration, me and her both was like,
That's the book I'm reading. Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers.
We were both like,
oh, that eye roll hurt. I rolled my eyes so much for 4 years, my eyeballs hurt.
So I managed my own face quite well in that moment.
Chase, did you want to answer? Because me and Ellie, our faces answered. So go ahead.
I have a question for him, though. I have a question for him. Can we and I follow you on Twitter, and you're like you're like the leader of my Twitter parade, and I'm like right behind you with the flags. And I have a question. You do use the phrase normalize a lot, and I love that because it's a concept, right? To normalize. I personally consider, now here it comes, I personally consider really bias and racism and lack of empathy, I consider it a mental illness. I explain it to my children that, their brain is broken. When my children say, why do they hate us because we're brown, or whatever heartbreaking things they say, I say their brain is broken. And so I really am of the opinion that the inability to understand a concept of empathy and compassion and equity, there may not be an AMA diagnosis for it. It may not be in a book or a diagnosis that's you have to give, but talk to me about how you feel about that in psychiatry, please.
I think that is an excellent question that I think has come up a lot on Twitter. People have been like, oh, so people who are racist, they clearly have some personality disorder. They have this, they have that, they have this mental illness. And so what happens, and why I always kind of speak to like avoiding that, is I think what can happen is that people conflate the two. Like, then it becomes, somebody racist will later on say like, I have a mental illness that lets me say the N word. And I'll be like, no. And I've had people say things like that. It gives them an out when there are people who actually have mental illness that is like so damaging to their lives, and they're not racist. You're right. As of right now, racism is not part of our DSM criteria, so our diagnostic manual for psychiatry. Things could change. Like, if they do change, then we will have to adapt and we will have to figure it out. But as of right now, it's not in there because I think racism is much more of a pattern of thought. It's not a mental illness. I think what we see happening, and just we're going to take it a couple steps back, is think about when a kid is born into a racist environment. What we can see is that there's less cognitive flexibility. It's still not a mental illness at that point, but less cognitive flexibility in some ways. So new ideas and like ideas about race, ideas about gender, ideas about somebody being LGBTQ are harder to interpret sometimes and understand. Still not a mental illness though. It's more of just an inflexibility. But a lot of people, you can actually train people out of that cognitive inflexibility. If people are taught to empathize, or they're put in environments that are more diverse, what we see is they actually become more accepting as time goes on. Not everybody, and I want to make sure that I say that, but it's much more to the like flexibility of a person and the environment that they grew up in. So once somebody grows up in a more racist environment, it becomes like that's all they know. And so actually them being in a more diverse environment later, or having to face some of these issues because they're not as flexible, it's jarring for them. And so what we see is people react in very violent ways, as we've seen. So I would say their brain isn't broken. Their brain is a little bit different right now in terms of how they can think about others and put themselves in other people's shoes. But what's really hopeful is that people can learn to retrain their brains in a lot of ways. And I would like to speak to my own experience. I've had friends who are family members basically now, but started out with saying some things about Black and gay people, and it took some time for them to understand. It took hard conversations. I shouldn't have had to do those conversations, but I have seen people change from them. So I would like to put that out there. And I'm here
Yeah,
for any other questions.
it's a great answer to my question, because I grew up, as I started our conversation, my comments to Ellen is I grew up in Boston, and which is an extremely um, conservative sort of, place with respect to people of color and the gay community. I grew up with a lot of gay men who had a ton of self-hatred because they grew up in really strict Italian families, and were totally subjected to all kinds of slurs their whole life growing up. So it caused all kinds of things. So yeah, you proved me wrong, but with all those degrees, I wanted you to. So thank you for working me
But
out,
as
because
he shares,
it's
all
true. I'm an example of that. I grew up hearing all kinds of crazy stuff my whole life in my environment. Irish on this side, Italian Catholic on this side, and I grew up hearing all of it in that bubble, and it just is a generational information that gets passed down, and it keeps being wrong and more wrong and more wrong, but it spreads like a virus. So I do understand your explanation, and thank you for it.
Can I add one thing? The other thing I think it's important to keep in mind is that, by virtue of being in the United States, we are all exposed to and indoctrinated into a kind of a racist kind of views to some degree. I mean, all of us, this is how this country was built. And so if we fall into the trap of assuming that only other people have these views, we lose sight of the opportunity to really grow and change ourselves. Like, we all need to do this. And so to some degree, I think if you're telling a young person their brain is broken, I understand that. It's a way to sort of make sense of something with a kid. And at the same time, I think we can say, and to some degree, we all have a ways to go. We all have some healing and changing to do, just by virtue of where we have grown up. I can't let this moment go by, Ellen, that we're speaking on this particular day, when Kim Janey was just sworn in as the first African American and first woman mayor of the city of Boston. So this is kind of a fantastic day to be talking to you.
I saw that. I tweeted last night a congratulatory tweet to her, but I don't think she has any social media. I couldn't find it if that's the case, but I saw that. How incredible, huh? I really, last night I was laying in bed, I was looking at Chase's tweets about normalizing things and stop conflating the two, mental illness with racism, and which is why I brought that up. And in that Kim Janey, right? Kim, yeah, is the first Black woman mayor of Boston. Unbelievable, really, really exciting.
shows you how much times have changed. It really does. So one more question that well, not question, but thing that I wanted to say is, I also think that when it comes to policy and things like that, I feel like a lot of times institutions and administrations put a Band-Aid on things. They tend to say oh yeah, we support LGBTQ, and that's where it ends. They don't have these type of, the same thing with hospitals with racism. They have these little computer generated little classes online where we have to talk about cultural awareness and things like that. And we literally just click next over and over and over, and we don't necessarily learn anything. And I'm quite sure for a nurse or healthcare worker that doesn't understand, she's not going to more understand because of this PowerPoint, So I think that it's like having a way to really penetrate these types of situations, especially when you're in an area of care, healthcare, mental health, whatever the case may be. I think that it sucks, because I know quite a few Black nurses and nurses of color that won't even join committees to help these type of things, because they feel like y'all just want to put us on the front of the committee, but y'all don't really want us to really change anything. And that's really the case. As soon as we've had multiple episodes now where we've heard people say that as soon as I actually wanted to implement change, they fired me, like Dr. Uche Blackstock, different things that people go through. And it's sad because you really don't want change. You just want to not lose money by coming off like you don't care about LGBTQ or racism and things like that. So it would be really, if there's anybody that's administration that's listening to this policy, whatever, the burden is not to just say I'm for it. The situation is to actually have people on your boards, like a mayor, like people that actually in power that can actually penetrate and change some of these things. Because coming from, I even talked to a different company, same thing, where they donated from their company to the NAACP, and their Black workers were like, could you ask us first what we maybe have thought that you should have donated that money to? Like the NAACP might be good, but the people in this community or your workers are the ones that could use the assistance. So I think it's about having these people that in power and also listening to them, putting them in spaces where they can actually change policy rather than just putting a Band-Aid and giving us a little pin that says we support LGBTQ or we are an anti-racist institution. That's great, but like, how can we show that in real people, in real life, and real care? So,
and better outcomes result in more money. Let's just break it down. If medical institutions are about making money, better outcomes, less stress among patients, less stress among Black pregnant women going in to have a baby, less stress equals better outcomes for everybody, for staff, for patients. Better outcomes equal better returns and profits. So it really makes sense to do the deep work and not just the surface work.
And data is your friend. Data is your friend. Invest the time and resources to track and pay attention to what these, like, how do we know what these outcomes are? Are there disparities? What inequities do those disparities reveal to us? And what strategies can we develop to overcome those gaps, right? That's how you can really be accountable as an organization providing care, is to know the information that garner whatever information you can by tracking it with intention, whether this is around racial differences or, again, different outcomes with LGBTQ patients versus otherwise. I really think it's a combination of things. Of course, we don't want to be totally numbers driven. I actually think that can be a problem, but numbers do matter, and they tell a story. And I think one way to be accountable, and accountability is a key word, right, is to track and show your outcomes with numbers.
Yeah, I think one of the other things is we need to figure out how to truly listen to each other. That is one of the biggest things that we're missing right now sometimes. I think everybody has brought up the point that we say, like, oh, we support diversity. And then you ask like the Black gay person, or you ask the gay person or the person of Asian descent, like, how does this play out in real time? And the person's like, ooh, well, but I'm splashed across like the website, it's fine. So we need to take a step back and say, not only making sure that people have power to actually affect change, but also listening to the people that you're bringing in who are diverse. How do we make sure that their voices are really heard and acted upon? Because we see that there's this huge pipeline of, let's bring in more diverse people, they'll fix things for us. Those people leave at the end. So how do we figure out how to stop that pipeline from happening? And how do we actually just sit down with people? Because I think one of the things we see a lot of is administrations do say that they want to fix things. And I think they have that goal underneath in some ways, but I think it's hard for them to take that look at themselves without feeling embarrassed or taking a moment to be like, I have made a lot of mistakes. And so people have a hard time doing that. So how do we also become more self-reflective too, as well?
and open-minded, because like you said, they have to be able to admit their mistakes sometimes and or admit how they can make changes. But I think overall, what we were trying to talk about today was how to increase visibility. And I think that one thing that we all spoke to is putting people in the right spaces so that they can be visible. You know what I'm saying? Like having those platforms open, because, our country was based on an older white man's lifestyle. And that ain't what it is no more. Now most of the population is now all mixed up, and we have all these different races, all these different types of people, but yet we're still targeting an older white male, and that's not the solution. So I think it's about having those type of conversations too, and understanding that the world is changing, and how can we change along with it. And institutions benefit because you're not treating an older white male. That may be a small percentage of my populations of patients, so to have a openness of conversation and an education beyond it, and not just the homepage of the website with me on it with the stethoscope, like, hi, I'm Black and I'm a nurse, to actually have, people in power that are saying, this is what we can do, this is what we can change, and this is how I would feel more comfortable working here. This is how my patients would feel more comfortable being seen and cared for. And that's exactly why my first question to you is, how can we help? Because I'm not a part of LGBTQ. So who am I to tell you or anybody else how they want to be seen or how they feel as though they should be better cared for? You have to ask the questions. You can't just assume that because it's almost like a arrogance sometimes that we have. Like, we just assume that, like, okay, they want to be seen, they want to be cared for, so this is what we're going to give them. No. Ask the questions and actually educate yourself so that we can actually move forward in a positive and constructive way that makes sense for everyone.
So good.
Oh, amen.
And you nurses have such a burden and are so busy that it's just like one more thing on your to-do list of every room you go into. So that's why I love Chase's point of starting with, rather than feeling about it like maybe it's a burden of something I have to do, introducing myself and introducing yourself in a way that sort of, kills two birds with one stone. You're inviting some conversation, but you're also just saying who you are and introducing yourself, which, you guys probably like to do when you walk into every room anyway, right?
And I don't know if you, sidebar, I know that some of you may know who Rolling Ray is, and his incident where he burned his face. He's a social media person. He burned his face somehow. And I commented underneath, I have of course, an Instagram, and, I have an Instagram following, and I commented underneath one of the posts, and I didn't know his pronouns. So I just said, I hope they are okay. And because I have an Instagram following, people underneath the post were like, they, who is they? Why are you trying to say, and people just really completely missed the mark of, I don't know his pronouns, and I'm not trying to name that man as something that he's not, that he is or it is. I don't know. So, and he does go by he, him, or his. But the point is that we're so uneducated that we take even respecting pronouns as rude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people are like, oh, well, why did you say they? Because I don't know. So I'm just going to say they. And I'm going to hope that that's respectful to him. So I think it's just an education piece, because people are offended on both sides. And it's so hard to be in the right sometimes.
Which brings us back to patience and grace.
Patience and grace. And I think that the theme of Chase's continuing education, and it's like, my sister is someone who lives in Massachusetts and worked in healthcare policy for many years, and she has a private consulting firm now, but she continues her education, and throughout her whole life she has always gone to school. And I think that whether we actually go to a physical university or online classes or not, we have to keep the theme of keeping our education going through our life, however we choose to educate ourselves. But continuing to learn and grow is something that we can all do all the time.
Yeah, I completely. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chase.
I completely agree with that, because I think, like, I used to only, they're behind me, but I used to only read fantasy books, really, because I was like, oh God, I gotta escape this world. But now I read like memoirs of other people's stories. And I think that's what Twitter has also been really helpful for, is seeing other people's experiences. Of course, there's always like the Twitter trolls and things like that. And like, we see that. But I think what we're building and what people are recognizing is that there's so many different ways of learning. Like, I met other LGBT Black doctors like on Twitter and got to learn about other people's experiences, and people who are transgender. Like, we can always continue learning, and there are many different avenues to do that. So I really love that point, Ellen.
And I think there's also a point to be graceful when you do hear people sometimes talk out of turn. Like, I know I have older family members that say things that I'm just like, oh Lord, how I'm supposed to explain to this lady that you're not supposed to say that? And in her life, that in her, you know, when you're born in the 1940s, your language and how you may speak may be different. But that's no different from somebody being white and their great grandmother saying the N-word. You still can say to that person, no, no, no. Like, I understand that in your era, that was something that was more normalized to say, but now it is not. And I'm going to tell you why. And if they take what you're saying, fine. If they don't, also fine. But the point is that you can still speak up and educate someone, because there's things that you ever see the Facebook memories of things that you said years ago? And I'll be like, oh no, I said that, you know? So I think that it's not just like when I'm older and they don't know how to express. No, it's all of us. We're all learning. Things I said 10 years ago, I'm like, what? Why was I not smart enough to know that I would not like that statement in 10 years, but you don't. So I think it's just also being able to educate someone without like clutching your pearls. Sometimes just calm down, have a conversation and educate them, especially because if hearing it from a loved one rather than saying it out on the street and getting mollywopped, it's great. It's a way better situation. So, you know, it's okay to educate your family, educate your friends, educate the older nurses on the floor that's saying, like, it's okay to educate people and communicate and give them grace and not understanding, and then you educate them.
Yes.
I just have to say that Molly Wop is the best drag queen name I've ever heard in my life. And someone needs to take that.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I was just going to say, you've just really described the difference between calling someone out and calling someone in, right? So that framing, which is something we are hearing more and more, is really, really powerful. To just invite someone into a conversation with you about what the impact of those words can be, and how it lands, and what it might mean in ways that they may or may not even know and may or intend, which of course is rarely the point. It's the impact that these words have on us that really we have to pay attention to. So I think what you're offering is powerful, because you are basically inviting us to speak up in the moment, which I don't know about you, but I have to make myself do that every single time. I find that to be scary and intimidating, even, and maybe especially, when I'm with someone I love. And so I have to take a deep breath and say, you know what, I don't succeed even close to 100% of the time, but I want to work on that. You know, can I just go back to something you just said, and I want to talk about that a little bit. You know, that's hard work, actually, and it's really a gift to someone else.
Yeah, I love both of you bringing that up. I think the way I describe it to people is setting limits is compassion, and setting limits is love. I think it's one of the ultimate forms of love, because you're stopping somebody from going down a path where they might say that out on the street and then get mollywopped. It's like that. So it's modeling good behavior too, of being able to say, like, this happened, this is how that felt. I'm going to reflect that back to you to make sure that's what you meant, because I don't think that's what you maybe meant. So I really like bringing up that point of like setting limits is okay. And Ellen, I completely get scared too every time I have to discuss things. When somebody says something, I'm like, oh, here we go again. And like, oh, do I have the energy for this? But I've seen it play out really well. So I'm glad you're bringing that up. It's scary for all of us, I think, to have to bring that up. But we do it because we can see that hopefully everybody can become better.
Well, I think that we learned grace, compassion. We've learned patience today. We've learned how to educate older people or people in our family that don't understand LGBTQ, so they don't get mollywopped on the street. So I think that we have done a great job today. Chase, Ellen, we so appreciate you. I mean, this conversation largely speaks volumes to how people are from all different places, of all different backgrounds. We all have different ways that we identify, but we were able to have a great conversation on how to move forward with this, because so many times we have conversations that's just like, no, 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 this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, when like the progressive conversation is, okay, yeah, it is, but how can we move forward from it in a positive way? How can we smile about this? How can we teach people and educate people on how to move forward, rather than just bashing or either side? You know what I mean? Because there's so much here that is vague and so many things that can be offensive, but I think the point is to understand, to educate, and to respect. So we so appreciate you. We appreciate everything that you have going on. We so appreciate Fentway. I think that's an amazing organization, and I hope you guys exceed far beyond where you are now. You've already. So we appreciate you. And Chase, I'm going to be following you on Twitter. I'm super excited to see what you got cooking. We appreciate you. Ellen, is there anything else that you wanted to say?
I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you. I know how busy you are, and Sheena and I have been doing these conversations for a while now, and we really just want to sort of use our platform to try to help other people and to learn ourselves. To, like we talked about, I know I can always continue my growth and my education and my level of understanding. And I make plenty of mistakes every day. And without the generosity of spirit of people like you coming on and giving us your time and having these thoughtful conversations, I am able to grow as a person, and I am able to better use my platform that I've been given to spread the love and the generosity of spirit. So I really am grateful to both of you, and thank you so much for helping us in this journey. And I know we're going to help other people too. So thank you so much.